What if I told you that the Wi-Fi you're using right now, the invisible thread connecting your phone, your car, your home, was first imagined by a woman the world only saw as beautiful? In the golden age of Hollywood, she was worshipped, a vision of perfection, elegance, and mystery. They called her the most beautiful woman in the world. But behind the red lips and velvet gowns was a mind racing with invention. While the world printed her face on movie posters, she was drafting blueprints to defeat Nazi submarines. While studios silenced her ideas, she designed the foundation of Bluetooth, GPS, and Wi-Fi. Her name was Hedy Lamarr, an actress, an inventor, a forgotten genius. And this is the story they never told you. In the grand city of Vienna during the roaring 1920s, a young girl would run along the cobblestone streets, her laughter mingling with the clattering sound of trams gliding over iron tracks. Beneath the towering architecture of the old city, a man walked hand in hand with his little daughter. Her name was Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler, but her family called her simply Hedy. Her father, Emil Kiesler, was a brilliant Jewish banker with an insatiable curiosity for how things worked. Every week, Emil would take her on long walks around the city to tram stations, machine shops, and engineering workshops. These were not ordinary walks. They were open-air classrooms where Hedy learned to understand how the world moved and operated. "Look at that, Hedy," Emil would say, pointing to the massive wheels turning under the tram. Electricity flows from the cables above, down to the engine, spinning those wheels. And the whole vehicle moves forward. Hedy's eyes sparkled. Her small hands would reach out to touch the cool metal of the tram, feeling the vibrations of the engine as if it were alive. At such a young age, she grasped something most adults struggled to understand: that logic and machinery could work together in perfect harmony, like a mechanical symphony. "How does electricity move through wires?" Hedy asked, her voice brimming with curiosity. Emil smiled, kneeling down to meet her gaze. "Electricity is like a tiny river, Hedy. It flows, carrying energy wherever it goes. And if we can control it, we can create anything." Hedy nodded, her eyes still locked on the spinning wheels of the tram. The city of Vienna became her classroom. Every rumble of a tram, every clatter of metal, they all blended into a mechanical symphony that she understood instinctively. If her father taught her about logic and machines, her mother, Gertrude Lichtwitz, instilled in her a sense of rhythm and beauty. Gertrude was no ordinary woman. Before marrying Emil, she had been a talented concert pianist, performing on grand stages across Europe. Her fingers danced over piano keys like ripples across a lake, graceful, precise, and filled with emotion. Every morning, Hedy would wake up to the sound of piano melodies floating through their home. Her mother played Beethoven's sonatas and Strauss's waltzes with elegance and mastery. The notes would seep into the walls, filling their modest home with warmth and serenity. "Listen closely, Hedy," Gertrude would say, her fingers gliding effortlessly across the piano keys. "Music is like a language. Every note speaks. You just have to learn how to listen." To Gertrude, music was not just harmony. It was a mechanism, an instrument where each part worked together to produce beauty. And it was here that Hedy learned something she never found on the streets with her father: that logic and beauty could exist together in perfect synchronization. In the afternoons, after long walks with Emil, Hedy would sit by her mother's side. Her eyes would follow the graceful movements of Gertrude's hands as they danced over the keys. She realized that music, much like machines, required precision and calculation. "My father taught me to ask questions," Hedy would later say. "But my mother taught me to listen to things that cannot be seen." But the world did not always recognize the brilliance behind Hedy's sharp eyes. As she grew into her teenage years, her beauty began to draw attention. Her perfectly symmetrical face, deep eyes, and graceful smile made people focus more on her appearance than her intellect. At 16, a local film director spotted Hedy walking the streets of Vienna. He approached her, handing her a business card, and said, "Your face is like a living Mona Lisa. You belong on the big screen." Hedy went home and showed the card to her mother. Gertrude smiled softly, her fingers playing over the silent piano keys. "You will be a star, Hedy," she said, "but never forget that stars which shine the brightest often burn out the quickest." Hedy's growing popularity brought many admirers, including a wealthy arms dealer named Fritz Mandl. Mandl was a powerful industrialist with deep connections to Mussolini and Hitler. He saw Hedy not as an actress, but as a trophy. At just 19 years old, Hedy married Fritz Mandl. He brought her into his world of grand palaces, glittering chandeliers, and high society gatherings. From the outside, her life seemed perfect, but inside, she was imprisoned. Mandl forbade her from acting. He banned her from speaking publicly. Hedy became not a wife, but a possession. Yet behind the marble walls and crystal chandeliers, Hedy continued to listen. Mandl often hosted lavish dinners with military officials and weapons engineers. In long discussions about radar, torpedoes, and communication systems, Hedy remained silent, but her mind recorded every word. "They spoke as if I didn't understand," she would later recall. "But I absorbed everything." Behind the smile she wore at grand parties, Hedy began planning something even Mandl could not predict: an escape. Behind the marble walls and stained glass windows of Fritz Mandl's grand estate, Hedy began planning something most would have deemed impossible: an escape from her gilded cage. Mandl, her wealthy husband, had locked Hedy away in a life of luxury that felt more like a prison. Lavish parties, glittering jewels, and personal servants could not mask the reality that she was no longer free. Every move she made was monitored. Every step she took was shadowed. But Hedy did not surrender to despair. For years, she observed the routines of the guards, memorized their schedules, and carefully crafted a plan behind the sweet smiles she wore each day. "The key to freedom isn't in their hands. It's in my mind," she whispered to herself one quiet evening. And finally the opportunity came. With intelligence and bravery rare for a woman of her time, Hedy orchestrated an escape plan that was nearly unimaginable. She disguised herself as a maid. Her flowing hair was hidden beneath a simple headscarf. Her elegant gowns were swapped for modest clothing, and her priceless jewelry was left behind on the vanity. There were no traces of glamour, no hint of a film star, just an ordinary woman, carrying a small suitcase, walking out of the grand gates under the eyes of guards. That night, Hedy left behind her old life without looking back. She crossed borders into Paris, hiding away in a cramped room in a rundown inn, spending her days sketching plans for the next move. Paris breathed life back into her spirit. In that city, she was no longer Mandl's wife or a prized possession. She was just a woman, reclaiming control over her destiny. But Hedy knew her escape was not complete. As long as she remained in Europe, Mandl's influence and political connections were a shadow that loomed. So, without hesitation, she journeyed to London, a city of gas lamps and industrial hum, where she found something that had eluded her for so long: a ticket to the land of dreams, America. Aboard the grand ship that sailed across the Atlantic Ocean, fate finally introduced her to a man who would change the course of her life forever: Louis B. Mayer. Mayer was the head of MGM Studios, one of the most powerful film empires in Hollywood. He was a towering figure, dressed in fine suits with a voice that carried authority. While walking along the ship's deck, his sharp eyes caught sight of Hedy, standing alone, breathing in the salt air at the stern. You look like a star," Mayer said, his gaze unflinching. Hedy turned, her expression calm yet cautious. It had been years since anyone looked at her that way, not as a trophy, but as something with potential, even if it was just for her face. Mayer smiled, his steps steady as he approached her. "Hollywood needs someone like you," he said. "Exotic, mysterious. You're not Hedwig Kiesler anymore. From now on, you're Hedy Lamarr." The name rolled off Meyer's tongue effortlessly, as if he had just reborn a star. Hedy stayed silent, her eyes studying the powerful man before her. In his eyes, she saw opportunity. In her mind, Mayer was a ticket to freedom. "You're very beautiful," he continued. "But in America, we can make you immortal." Hedy finally agreed. Not because she longed to return to the screen, but because she understood that in a world that only saw her face, the only way to survive was to control the frame. America welcomed her with spotlights and red carpets. Her face adorned movie posters. Her name sparkled in silver letters across theater marquees. Hedy Lamarr was no longer the wife of an arms dealer. She was now Hollywood's goddess, the most beautiful woman in the world. But behind the glamour and glitter, amidst the grand parties and flashing cameras, Hedy held on to something that no one else could see, a hunger for science, and a dream to create something far greater than just a role on screen. Hollywood in the 1940s was a place where dreams and reality intertwined under the dazzling lights of studio sets. Cameras clicked, vintage car horns echoed in the streets, and silver screens projected the faces of gods and goddesses of film. Among those stars, one name shone brighter than most: Hedy Lamarr. Her films became legends. She captivated audiences in Algiers with her gaze of mystery. She embodied luxury and elegance in Ziegfeld Girl, wearing shimmering gowns that reflected the spotlight's glare. Her face adorned massive posters across the nation. Every corner of every city knew her as the most beautiful woman in the world. But what the world did not know, behind the beautiful face on the silver screen, Hedy hid a secret far greater than her beauty. While Hollywood's biggest stars spent their nights at lavish parties, Hedy Lamarr would return to her grand Beverly Hills mansion, walk down a long corridor filled with classical paintings, and stop in front of an unassuming wooden door. But behind that door was not a lavish parlor or a dressing room filled with diamonds. It was her private laboratory. The walls were lined with shelves of engineering books, some of them dusty and rare. Her workbench was cluttered with wires, vacuum tubes, circuit boards, and electrical components. In the midst of Hollywood's grandeur, Hedy Lamarr had carved out a small space where she could be her true self, an inventor. Every night, after the cameras stopped rolling, Hedy would roll up her sleeves, tie back her hair, and sit at her workbench. She would solder wires with the precision of an engineer, read technical manuals with the seriousness of a scholar. "The world sees my lips," she once confided to a close friend, "but I think with my brain." In her laboratory, Hedy found peace she had never known in front of the camera. When electricity flowed through the wires she connected, when tiny lights blinked to life on her circuit boards, she felt powerful. For the first time, she could control something, not her face, not her body, but technology. She experimented with radio waves, studied how frequencies moved, connected circuits with the care of a craftsman, as if assembling a delicate puzzle. If electricity can move through wires, she pondered, why can't signals jump from one frequency to another? That question lingered in her mind, haunting her between film takes, following her through the glitter of Hollywood galas. Hedy knew there was something there, a big idea. She just needed to piece it together. When World War II erupted, Hollywood burst into patriotic fervor. Actors and actresses rallied to sell war bonds, giving speeches on grand stages to raise money for Allied forces. But for Hedy, it wasn't enough. To her, war was not just about speeches and donations. She wanted more. She wanted to help in a scientific way. Her mind drifted back to the discussions at Mandel's extravagant dinner parties about torpedoes, about radio frequencies, about signal tracking. She remembered how the engineers spoke about the greatest flaw in naval warfare. Enemy forces could easily jam the radio signals of torpedoes. And that was when Hedy saw the opportunity. An idea began to grow in her mind, like a tiny ember struggling to ignite in the wind. If they can jam the signal, she whispered to herself, then I will find a way to avoid it. Hedy knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed a partner. Someone who understood technology, someone who could turn her ideas into reality. Behind the dazzling lights of Hollywood, amidst grand parties and red carpets, Hedy Lamarr was designing something that would change the future, not on the silver screen, but on the battlefield. Hollywood knew her as a goddess of beauty, a perfect figure who dazzled on the silver screen, praised as the most beautiful woman in the world. But Hedy Lamarr did not see herself that way. Behind the glittering gowns and camera flashes, her mind worked like a machine, searching for patterns, linking ideas, assembling possibilities. One quiet evening in Los Angeles, at an avant-garde art party, Hedy met a man as unconventional as she was, George Antheil. Antheil was not just an ordinary musician. He was known as the bad boy of music, an avant-garde composer who once wrote symphonies for 16-player pianos and industrial fans. His work was radical, revolutionary, and often misunderstood. But when Hedy approached him in the corner of the room, their conversation wasn't about movies, it wasn't about music, it was about torpedoes and radio frequencies. I once heard how torpedoes could be jammed by the enemy. Hedy said, what if there was a way to switch the signals so they couldn't be traced? Antheil paused for a moment. A Hollywood actress was speaking about radio frequencies with the fluency of an engineer. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Switch signals? You mean? Like the keys of a player piano. Hedy's eyes lit up. She explained her idea in stunning detail. The concept was simple yet revolutionary. If a torpedo could switch its radio signal at random, in sync with its transmitter, the enemy would not be able to jam it. Antheil called it frequency hopping. Like the keys of a piano that jump from note to note, the radio signal would hop from one frequency to another, making it nearly impossible to track or block. Together, Hedy and Antheil spent months developing the system in her private laboratory. They sketched blueprints, connected circuits, and even used player piano rolls to simulate the random switching of frequencies. On paper, the concept was flawless. The signals jumped from one frequency to another in a synchronized pattern known only to the sender and receiver. The enemy would never be able to lock onto it, and the torpedoes would glide through the water undisturbed. Imagine, Hedy said to Antheil one evening, if we do this, we could save thousands of lives. In August 1942, they submitted the idea to the United States government under the official name, Secret Communication System. The patent was approved and classified, a bold step forward in secure communication technology. Hedy had high hopes. She imagined her invention protecting ships, saving soldiers, changing the course of war. But when she presented the idea to the U.S. Navy, the response was not admiration, but condescension. You're too pretty to be taken seriously. The words came from a high-ranking officer, spoken with a smile that was sweet but sharp. Why don't you use that beautiful face of yours to sell war bonds instead? Hedy stood there, silent, in a room full of men in uniform. Her mind was racing with possibilities. In her hands was an invention that could change warfare forever. But in their eyes, she was just another pretty face. Amidst Hollywood's flashing lights, Hedy Lamarr had discovered a way to save countless lives. But the world looked away, too blinded by her beauty to see her genius. The world moved forward swiftly after the war. Cities were rebuilt, technology advanced rapidly, and radio signals spread across every corner of the globe. But amidst all that progress, one name began to fade into the background: Hedy Lamarr. In the early 1950s, the secret communication system patent, which Hedy and George Antheil had submitted in 1942, expired without ever being used by the U.S. military. The patent was locked away in archives, untouched, while technology surged forward. The idea that had once filled Hedy with so much excitement now seemed like a distant dream. The military never implemented it, and the technology industry overlooked its potential. "They saw my face, not my mind," she said in a small, almost forgotten interview. What Hedy didn't know was that the concept of frequency hopping she had invented with Antheil would become the foundation for Wi-Fi, GPS, and Bluetooth, technologies that would eventually connect billions around the world. In laboratories far from Hollywood, engineers began experimenting with wireless communication. They discovered that frequency hopping could improve security and speed in data transmission. They refined it, produced it, and sold it. That technology exploded onto the market, generating billions of dollars. But Hedy Lamarr's name was never mentioned. No one knew that the technology was born from the mind of a Hollywood actress. As time passed, Hedy slowly disappeared from Hollywood's spotlight. She grew older, film offers stopped coming, and the face that once captivated millions began to fade from public memory. In her later years, she lived in solitude, far from the world that once adored her. Plastic surgeries to preserve her beauty led to legal troubles and financial struggles. Newspapers were more interested in her appearance than her brilliance. "People are fascinated with my face," she said in a brief interview, "but they never knew my mind." In her modest home, she would sit in front of the television, watching technology advance rapidly. Wireless phones, satellite transmissions, even unmanned drones, all functioning with principles she had once dreamed of. No one knocked on her door. No one asked how she had designed that system amid Hollywood's glitter and glamour. Her name was erased from the history of technology. Hedy lived out her days in isolation. She was not rich, not celebrated, and only a few knew about her genius. Her only connection to her past was the television screen, which displayed a world thriving with the very technology she had envisioned. The invention she created with George Antheil, meant to protect ships and save lives, was now being used to connect the world, without ever mentioning her name. In a world now connected by wireless signals through cell phones and GPS, Hedy Lamarr's name remained hidden in the shadows of history. She had dreamed of changing the world, and she succeeded without anyone realizing it. Technology surged forward with unstoppable momentum. The world became more connected. Radio waves carried voices and data across oceans. Cell phones and computers communicated without wires. Those signals danced invisibly through the air, hopping from one frequency to another, assembling information at the speed of light. And amidst all that progress, one name began to resurface from the shadows: Hedy Lamarr. After decades of being forgotten, the technology world finally began to realize the brilliance hidden in plain sight. Frequency hopping, the idea once dismissed by the military, had become the backbone of Wi-Fi, GPS, and Bluetooth. Young engineers started tracing back the origins, uncovering the old patent filed under the names Hedy Lamarr and George Antheil. A brilliant idea born from a small lab, crafted by a Hollywood actress and an avant-garde composer. In 1997, the Electronic Frontier Foundation honored Hedy Lamarr with a prestigious award for her contribution to secure communication technology. But Hedy did not attend. She was too old, too frail. She heard the news from a distance, behind the walls of her quiet home. "People finally understand," she whispered, but it took them long enough. 3 years later, In the year 2000, Hedy Lamarr passed away alone. There were no flashing cameras, no bouquets from the big studios, just silence, and the name of a woman nearly erased from history. Yet, even as her body was laid to rest, her legacy continued to live on. In the air that carried wireless signals, in the waves that guided GPS, and in the Wi-Fi connections that linked millions of devices. Every time someone connected wirelessly to the world, every time signals jumped between frequencies, they were connected by Hedy Lamarr. 2 decades after her death, Hedy Lamarr's name began to resurface. Engineers, feminists, and technology advocates sought to reclaim the legacy of the woman who had been overlooked. Documentaries were made, books were rewritten, and finally, history began to remember her not just as an actress, but as an inventor. The world saw her beauty, but history remembers her mind. In the airwaves that carry wireless signals, in every connection made without wires, Hedy Lamarr's name flows with the frequency she envisioned. The world finally remembers her, not as just a Hollywood star, but as the genius who changed how we connect.